Hello and welcome to Winter's Edge. My name is Matt, and in this cozy tavern here, I read you a chapter of my novel. And while I read that chapter, I also illustrate it and share that art process. So let's get into it. Chapter 2 50 Years Ago. The king stood stooped on a great wall. He was a big man, round in the belly and sporting a tight beard, as if to accentuate a chin that was slowly disappearing. A small group of men stood behind him, giving him distance. The city of Roulon was also at his back, unnaturally quiet, as if holding its breath. The king looked to the south, where his realm stretched as far as the eye could see. It had been beautiful. Plains of rolling hills, lush forests, and majestic mountains. The king blinked with wet eyes. Now a great scar travelled the land's length, the path of a monstrous army that had destroyed everything that stood in its way. It ended here at the foot of the king's city. A last desperate stand was made on these very walls. Against all odds they had won, but the cost had been terrible. Other cities under his rule had been crushed and his armies shattered. The years to come would be dark times indeed. His realm was a broken battlefield. Crows filled the skies, and the bodies of his men littered the ground. The air tasted of ash. Despite the carnage, this was not what drew the eye. Giants stood in the fields. Huge constructs of stone and steel paused in mid-attack, as if frozen in time. A terrible army of behemoths that yesterday had seemed unstoppable. The king stood face to face with the closest giant. It had almost reached the wall. This one was mostly made of stone, somehow fused together to make a crude, ape-like body. The head was massive, a moss-covered boulder roughly the height of a man. Its creator had taken the time to carve in a blunt face and hollow out the eyes. The king shuddered. Those eyes had been glowing less than a day ago. Now they were lifeless pits. The king couldn't decide which was worse. He gazed upward. The giant had raised his arms to the sky, ready to crush the wall. It had been that close. The great rock hands hung over him, stalled in the attack. The magic that had powered the constructs had fled, leaving them as hideous, lifeless sculptures. The bodies of his brave men surrounded them. Two men moved to stand beside the king, one tall and arrow straight, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a huge, drooping moustache. The other was old and bearded, but powerfully built. The king heard them, but didn't turn. He held the stare of the stone giant. "How did he make so many?" he whispered. The tall man glanced at the older man, unsure if the question was directed at them. The older man just stood still, his head bowed as if under a great weight. The tall man stepped forward to stand beside the king. He too found himself looking into the black eye pits of the giant. He cleared his throat. "After the banishment we lost track of him, my lord. He's had over 2 years. And with his power..." The king cut him off. "After his banishment? After I banished him?" He turned to the tall man. "You think this is my fault, General?" "Of course not, my lord." "No," said the king. He pointed at the scar that ran through the land like a jagged wound. "I did not do that." There was something unnatural about the burnt-out path. It shifted under the gaze and brought on a wave of nausea. The king looked away. The general nodded. "Carul." "Not Carul," snapped the king. "Magic did this." He turned on the old man. "Your magic, Cordan. The magic you teach in your school, to your students." The group behind the king shifted uncomfortably. Cordan's gaze stayed on the ground. "I did not teach this, my lord," he said, barely at a whisper. "Well, it's out there for the curious. You give them the tools to find it." The king turned his back to the old man. "This was always going to happen," he muttered. If not Karul, then someone else. The power is there for the taking. Look at what one man can do. He glanced at Cordan. The old man's head was still bowed. Look at it, screamed the king. Cordan finally looked up and saw the battlefield. He saw the rolling smoke, the circling birds, and the still corpses of men stretched as far as the eye could see. He saw the 1,000 constructs standing like jagged towers over the carnage. It was all his fault. What would you have me do? He finally whispered. Oh, you will do nothing, said the king. Ever again. Magic ends here. There will be no more schools, no more teaching, and no more weavers. There was a gasp from the small group of men. General Hawkins was taken aback. My lord, the enemy will not stop using magic. We must be prepared. You are finished too, General. This was your failure as well. The general paled visibly. We stopped the attack. You did not, screamed the king. He grabbed the general by the neck and thrust him against the ramparts. The wide brim hat fell to the fields below. Look at your armies, General. Is this your victory? General Hawkins grit his teeth as he hung halfway over the wall. His hands kept him from toppling over the waist-high parapet. He glanced back at the group behind him. Some of them were smirking. Do not look at them, shouted the king. Look at your great victory. General Hawkins narrowed his eyes as he took in the carnage. The king held firm. Well, is this your victory? Snarled the king, shaking the man savagely. One of the general's hands slipped and he was pushed further over the edge. My lord, please unhand me. Answer me, the general snarled. This is not a victory, my lord. The king leaned in closer. His meaty hand held the general tight. He pushed the man further over the edge. No, it is not. Because you rely too much on magic. It has become a crutch, and when it failed you, well, we saw your worth. Without it, you are less than a man. General Hawkins heard a snigger behind him. This was too much. Enough, he said, and suddenly the king was hauled into the air. An unseen force lifted him over the wall and held him in place, hovering high over the field below. The king's legs thrashed as he struggled in front of the general. The tall man brushed himself down. There was an outcry behind him, and the general turned to the group. Quiet, or he falls. The men paused, swords half drawn. Cordan watched the king thrash in the air. He squinted at the general in confusion. Hawkins, what are you doing? What I should have done years ago. What I could have done at any moment I wanted to. He stretched out his arm and his hat returned to him. Why do we let this pathetic little man rule over us? He has no special strength or intelligence, certainly no real power. He is our king, said Cordan, simply. He just banished you. You, Cordan, the greatest of us all. You should be leading us, not this. The general waved dismissively at the struggling fat man. Lead us, said Cordan sadly. Hawkins, I could not even run a school. No, it is over. Put him down. The general stared hard at Cordan, but the old man was not looking at him. He still looked at the battlefield with dead eyes. The general's face softened and his shoulders sagged. The king landed roughly on the rampart walls. General Hawkins watched the fat man struggle to stand with contempt. Your power is nothing, an illusion given to you by fools. You don't want to banish magic to protect the realm. You just hate that it makes people more powerful than you. The general gave Cordan a small nod. Call on me when there is need. Suddenly the general shot up into the air at an impossible speed. There was a booming crack of thunder, and he was gone. Cordan simply stepped off the edge of the wall and vanished. The end of chapter 2.